The last decade has seen most southern African countries hit by consecutive climate disasters that have left millions food insecure. The region has endured 4 consecutive droughts, widespread flooding, and economic instability. Food systems, which are mostly anchored by smallholder farmers across the region, have been repeatedly affected by the compound shocks of droughts and floods. In 2015, the El Nino-induced drought left nearly 40 million people without enough food and water. The devastation from the 2018 Cyclone Idai alone that hit Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Malawi left over 8.7 million people, a majority of whom were smallholder farmers in need of food. In Malawi, floods affected a total of 91,638 hectares of farming land, over half of which is used to grow maize. In Mozambique, Cyclone Idai hit 715,378 hectares of cultivated land in the central and southern regions. What is even more glaring is that prior to cyclones Idai and Kenneth, 1.7 million people faced hunger in Mozambique because of the 2018 drought, but the number increased to 3 million in the immediate aftermath of the floods. The World Food Programme estimates that over 40 million people will be food insecure this year. This hunger crisis is on a scale we've not seen before, and the evidence shows it's going to get worse. The numbers could still increase due to COVID-19, which is diverting resources to medical life-saving interventions. The COVID-19 pandemic is impacting the economies of most countries in Southern Africa in devastating ways. Food systems are among the hardest hit. The drought response appeals in the region have been underfunded, raising doubts on whether governments alone would be able to deal with the hunger crisis if food systems are significantly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. There are risks of widespread hunger and livelihood crisis if bold action is not taken to minimize the disruptions of COVID-19 on food systems. Chiedza Hungwe, a mother of 5 and a smallholder farmer in rural Gutu district, Zimbabwe, bemoaned that there hasn't been much crop yield in most farmers' fields this year, owing to a drought, and our only hope before COVID-19 was income from the recently constructed market garden, which has constant supply of water. Chiedza's hopes have been dashed by the COVID-19 pandemic because, together with her colleagues, she will not be able to sell her produce because boarding schools, their primary markets, are closed due to the ongoing lockdown. There are early warning signs on how markets and supply systems are being affected, especially in countries with travel restrictions or lockdowns. Informal food markets are vital to feeding African cities. The urban poor rely on these markets to buy and sell fresh food at affordable prices, and they're also primary sources of food for most urban populations, while smallholder farmers equally rely on urban informal markets to sell their produce and raise income to sustain their livelihoods. Knowledge Transfer Africa, KTA, whose platform Mkambo uses technology to provide market information on farm produce, reported that the temporary closure of Mbare Musika market in Harare triggered price increases of 300% for a head of cabbage, 35% for a 20 kg of sugar beans, and 30% for a bucket of the main staple, maize. In Mozambique, the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies, PLAS, reports that regulations to restrict movement will likely affect the ability of smallholder farmers to mobilize labor, which is critical for harvesting crops such as maize, peanuts and beans for preparing for the second planting season. Finally, the travel restrictions imposed by most countries will likely impact on the provision of extension services and the early warning monitoring mechanisms for transboundary pests. Smallholder farmers are usually dependent on government agencies for extension services and pest management, and they have less adaptation and coping mechanisms due to their low levels of income. Oxfam acknowledges the negative pressures which COVID-19 could exert on food systems and the resultant food insecurity amongst the most vulnerable communities in the region. We propose bold recommendations to secure food systems and to cushion the most vulnerable and bottom down of the pyramid in the society. 1. Donors should urgently increase their funding of the UN drought appeal and increase the allocations of flexible funding for resilience building programs by using crisis modifiers, integrated programs, and increased contingency funding. Furthermore, donors should in future provide preventative and multi-year funding to enable longer-term solutions rather than continuous appeals for emergency. 2. Governments should put in place mechanisms that minimize disruptions to farming operations, which enable access to inputs, markets, and other critical supplies essential to farming operations. 3. Governments and local authorities should urgently invest in improving sanitation facilities at markets where necessary, increase market space as a way of decongesting popular markets, and develop with innovative ways of promoting social distancing within the markets. 4. We urge appropriate government bodies to monitor and, when required, regulate prices of essential commodities so that suppliers and retailers do not charge exorbitant prices for basic foodstuffs. 5. Governments should put in place measures to ensure that smallholder farmers and micro, small and medium agro enterprises (MSMAE) access financial rescue packages being made available to cushion business. Governments and central banks should also engage financiers to restructure agricultural loans. 6. Governments' development partners, agribusinesses, and mobile phone operators should collaborate closely in ensuring that mobile technologies are used to provide extension services to farmers and for pest and disease surveillance, ICT information on market prices, and electronic financial transactions that will virtually connect rural farmers to consumers without risking COVID exposure while meeting consumer needs. 7. Governments and development partners should urgently identify poor and marginalized farmers infected by the COVID-19 disruptions and provide them with input subsidies such as livestock, seed, and fertilizer. Oxfam works across the Southern African region and the physical presence in Malawi, Mozambique, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zambia.